The alien warship loomed above the planet, its size unfathomable to any human eye. The sleek metal surface of the ship glistened under the dim light of the distant star. Varroth stood at the observation window, looking out over the stars. The air was cold and sterile inside the War Council room, but it was nothing compared to the coldness that often came with the task before him today. He would observe something unlike any other trial he had seen in his long years of service. A human child about 12 years old was about to step into a simulator designed to train soldiers for battle, and Varroth was supposed to watch this child and assess what made humanity so different from the countless other species he had encountered and fought with over the years. He knew that humans were unpredictable, passionate, quick to adapt, but what could a child do when placed in the most difficult scenario? He had no idea what to expect, but he would be watching it unfold before him. The council room was filled with officers, their faces unreadable, but their eyes fixated on the large screen displaying the interior of the simulator room. At the center of the room was a single seat occupied by a small figure, Emily Carter, her brown hair tied back in a messy ponytail, her eyes focused ahead on the controls that would guide the starship she was about to pilot. On the screen, she looked like just any other child, but Varroth knew better. He had been briefed on the experiment. She had been chosen because of her strong aptitude in a variety of subjects, a natural curiosity, and above all a deep love for the concept of space exploration. She was given the same challenge that many of the most talented alien warriors had faced in simulations, but this time the stakes were different. It wasn't about victory or defeat in the simulation. It was about understanding what made her capable of performing beyond her age and experience, what was the source of that strength that humans had shown time and time again. The door behind Varroth opened, and a technician entered the room carrying a device that would monitor the simulation. The technician placed the device down on the table with a soft click. Before nodding toward the Admiral, Varroth acknowledged the gesture with a subtle nod of his own. As he took his place beside the large viewing screen, Emily was adjusting the headset, her hands resting on the control panel. She took a deep breath, the kind of breath that suggested she was preparing for something much larger than what she had expected. She was calm, a little too calm for Varroth's liking. But that was the nature of humans. Wasn't it always too calm before the storm? The technician began the countdown on the screen, the bright lights flashing in the simulation room. As Emily's starship powered up slowly, the voices of the aliens in the room seemed to fade as everyone's attention was focused on the child in the simulator. Emily's fingers hovered above the controls. She looked like she was about to perform some complex maneuver or issue a command, but instead she simply stared at the screen, waiting for the next step. She had no idea what was about to happen, but her confidence never wavered, not even for a second. Varroth leaned in closer to the screen, his eyes narrowing slightly. There was something about her expression, the stillness, that felt different from the other humans he had encountered. They were full of emotion. They were often wild in their reactions, but this child was focused, almost as if she knew something no one else did. But then again, it was just a simulator, and what could a child do in one of those anyway? The simulator sprang to life with a soft hum and the flicker of lights as Emily's starship emerged into a vast, empty expanse of space. The display was filled with endless blackness, dotted with stars and distant planets. But soon that silence was shattered. A wave of alien warships emerged from the void, their forms massive and menacing, each ship bristling with weapons and power. Emily's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't let it show. Her hands gripped the controls, and without hesitation she pushed forward. The ship responded with a gentle lurch as it powered up and began to accelerate. Varroth watched closely, his eyes scanning every movement on the screen. He had seen simulations like this before, designed to test the reflexes and decision-making abilities of pilots. With the alien fleet closing in, he expected Emily to hesitate, maybe panic, maybe fail, but she did none of these things. Instead, she calmly adjusted the ship's trajectory, barely avoiding the first wave of attacks. A barrage of plasma missiles streaked toward her ship, but Emily steered the vessel smoothly to the side, narrowly escaping the onslaught. The alien observers were silent, their eyes fixed on the screen as the child performed maneuvers that many seasoned pilots would have struggled with. The alien fleet didn't slow down. They pressed forward, relentless and unyielding. But Emily didn't flinch with every attack she found a way to adapt to it. She didn't rely on the expected tactics. Instead, she thought outside the box, using the environment around her, asteroids, dust clouds, and debris, to her advantage. She steered the ship in ways that Varoth knew were not part of the standard training program. She wasn't just dodging attacks, she was outmaneuvering them, turning the battlefield into something entirely new. The alien fleet seemed to falter for a moment, as if it couldn't quite keep up with her movements. Varoth's mind raced. He couldn't help but be intrigued. How was this possible? How was a child able to anticipate the fleet's movements and react with such precision and creativity? He had expected a predictable sequence of events, a test where the human child would make a few mistakes before ultimately failing. But instead, he was watching something entirely different. He was watching a child who was rewriting the rules as she went along. The more Varoth observed, the more he found himself questioning everything he knew about humans. This was no ordinary child. This wasn't someone who relied on logic or data alone. She was using something else, something deeper, an instinctual understanding of how to move and react in the heat of battle. It was as if her very presence in the simulator was shifting the parameters of the test. Emily continued to weave her ship through the battlefield, her focus unbroken, as she fired back at the alien ships, launching a precise volley of energy blasts that struck with pinpoint accuracy, each shot finding its mark and causing the enemy ships to stagger. The alien fleet was slowly being whittled down, not by sheer power or strength, but by the ingenuity and quick thinking of a single human child. Varoth stood motionless, his mind racing as he watched Emily's ship perform feats that defied the capabilities of the simulator. He could no longer dismiss her as a mere child in a machine. She was something more, and he wasn't sure yet if that was a threat or an opportunity. The tension in the room thickened as Emily's starship pressed deeper into the battle, and the alien fleet continued to react in ways the simulation designers never intended. Varoth, along with the rest of the council, was now fully invested in what was unfolding. The warships, once programmed to attack with calculated precision, were now starting to behave differently. Emily's movements, her unpredictable tactics, were somehow altering the way the simulation responded. The alien fleet that had once been an impenetrable force now seemed to hesitate, react slower, even struggle to adapt. It started with small things: a ship turning too quickly, its trajectory off by a few degrees, a plasma shot that veered slightly to the left instead of its intended target. At first, Varoth thought it might be a technical glitch. He signaled the technicians to check the simulator's integrity. Their responses were quick, their systems running smoothly, confirming there were no issues. But Varoth's instincts told him otherwise. The simulation wasn't malfunctioning, it was evolving. The next wave of alien ships launched a coordinated strike, one that would usually overwhelm any pilot. But Emily, undeterred, pulled a maneuver so daring that it pushed the boundaries of what was possible in the simulator. She dove her starship into a nearby asteroid field, using the massive rocks as shields. The enemy followed, undeterred, thinking they could trap her. But instead of retreating or trying to outrun them, Emily executed a series of flips and spins that placed her directly behind the enemy flagship. She fired just as the flagship tried to pivot, hitting its engines and sending the massive ship spiraling out of control. The alien observers sat in stunned silence. Varoth's sharp eyes narrowed in disbelief. The flagship had been one of the most powerful ships in the fleet, designed to take on entire armadas. Yet it had been brought down by a single human child who had not relied on strength or sheer firepower, but instead on quick thinking, innovation, and an understanding of the environment around her. It wasn't supposed to be possible. As the enemy fleet regrouped and adjusted its formation, Emily's starship moved with newfound fluidity. The simulation's response to her seemed less mechanical, more organic. The environment she was flying through, the debris, the asteroids, the distant star, no longer just acted as background noise. They were actively interacting with her ship, responding to her decisions. It was almost as if the simulation, once rigid and predetermined, was now adapting to Emily's commands in real time. almost as if it were alive. Varroth stood motionless, his mind racing to keep up with what he was witnessing. Could the simulation itself be learning from Emily's actions? Could her unconventional methods, her human creativity, be so powerful that they were beginning to affect the very structure of the training environment? The question gnawed at him, and it was one he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer to. The alien fleet, now clearly struggling to match Emily's unpredictable tactics, began to splinter. Each time they tried to corner her, she was already 5 steps ahead. With every new wave of attacks, the fleet seemed less coordinated, more desperate. Emily had no formal military training, no special equipment. Yet she was dismantling the fleet piece by piece with sheer instinct, guided by a mind that couldn't be predicted. The alien technicians whispered among themselves, their voices growing more frantic. Something wasn't right. Something was happening that they couldn't explain. And it wasn't just the malfunctioning ships, it was Emily herself. She had crossed a threshold. The child wasn't just reacting to the simulation. She was shaping it, and that realization sent a chill through Varroth's spine. The battle raged on, but the simulation had shifted into something almost unrecognizable. Emily's ship moved through the battlefield with a fluidity that seemed to defy the laws of the simulation. Each maneuver, each decision, was less about what the system expected and more about what Emily herself wanted, what she imagined the battle could be. The environment around her wasn't just a backdrop now. It responded to her thoughts, her desires, as though it were a living, breathing entity. The asteroid fields became obstacles to trap her enemies, not just hazards to avoid. The distant nebulae weren't just colorful blips of light. They were resources, places to hide, places to turn the tables. The simulation was being rewritten. Varroth stood rigid, his eyes locked on the screen, his earlier skepticism replaced by a deep, unsettling curiosity. This wasn't a child in a machine anymore. This was something else. He had seen humans on the battlefield before, brash, determined, but often predictable. They fought with heart, with a fierce will to survive. But Emily wasn't just fighting to survive. She was transcending the boundaries of the simulation, turning it into a living challenge. There was a force in her actions, something intangible, yet undeniable, that no alien technology or advanced strategy could easily counter. And it wasn't just the ship's maneuvers. As Emily's concentration deepened, the simulation seemed to grow more complex. The ships of the alien fleet, once pre-programmed to engage with cold, mechanical precision, now faltered. Their strategies were no longer effective. They reacted to her moves, adjusting in ways that seemed almost hesitant, as if uncertain of what to do next. And with each hesitation, Emily struck, her starship slipping through gaps in their formation, picking off one enemy vessel after another. It was a game of cat and mouse, only Emily wasn't the mouse. Varroth's mind raced. How was this happening? How was she so deeply connected to the simulation that it seemed to be evolving in real time? The human race had always been adaptable, but this was something beyond adaptation. This was creation. Emily wasn't just responding to the environment. She was shaping it, crafting it to fit her will. The more he watched, the more it felt like Emily herself was becoming one with the starship, as if her very consciousness was guiding its every movement. The ship no longer felt like a machine. It felt like an extension of her. Suddenly, a large portion of the fleet concentrated its firepower on her ship, determined to bring it down. The display flashed with incoming missiles, beams of energy, and massed firepower that would have obliterated any ordinary pilot. But Emily's response wasn't one of panic. She didn't flee. Instead, she angled her ship toward a massive debris field, a shattered moon with chunks of rock large enough to hide an entire fleet. The alien ships, programmed to overwhelm with sheer force, pursued her into the field, but they couldn't keep up with the erratic turns and sudden drops in velocity. Emily moved as if the field itself were part of her starship dancing between the floating rocks with almost eerie precision. In one seamless motion, she turned the tables. The alien fleet, unable to follow her sharp turns, collided with each other, their ships scattering like broken glass. The first wave of enemies was reduced to debris, their once imposing forms now twisted remnants of their former selves. Emily had turned their strength into their weakness. Her brilliance had outsmarted their power. Varoth's eyes widened. The moment of realization hit him like a thunderclap. The child was doing more than simply surviving. She was bending the rules of the simulation to her will. She was outthinking a system designed to be flawless. The question of how long she would last in the simulation no longer seemed relevant. It was clear now that the battle was no longer about survival. It was about something much bigger. It was about the raw, unpredictable strength of humanity's mind. And Emily Carter, in her unassuming youth, was proving that in the most extraordinary way. The simulation had reached a breaking point, and the alien fleet was on the brink of collapse. Emily, her heart pounding in her chest, gripped the controls with newfound determination. The calmness that had initially defined her reactions was now matched by a deep focus, an understanding that something far greater than just a simple test was at stake. The battle had become something personal. It was no longer just about maneuvering a starship. It was about proving the essence of what it meant to be human. To think, to adapt, to overcome. The alien Admiral Varoth watched with an intensity that mirrored Emily's own. His once stern expression had softened into one of quiet awe, though he still struggled to comprehend what was happening. The fleet, once coordinated and deadly, now seemed disoriented, a collection of ships that no longer knew how to fight. The simulation's once precise parameters had begun to warp, slipping through the cracks of Emily's influence. It was as if the very fabric of the test had started unraveling, unable to keep pace with her ingenuity. But now, the final challenge was upon her. A colossal alien flagship, larger than any other ship in the fleet, loomed on the horizon, its weapon systems powered up, its defenses impenetrable. It was the ultimate test. The alien fleet had thrown everything it had at her, and now it was time for the final strike. Emily had one last shot to bring it down. If she failed, the simulation would be considered a loss, and she would have failed the test. There was no room for error. But Emily wasn't intimidated. Instead, she grinned. She wasn't going to fight this battle the way they expected. She wasn't going to face the flagship head-on like any other pilot might. Instead, she turned her ship away, zooming toward a nearby asteroid belt, dense with debris and hiding places. The alien flagship pursued relentlessly, but it wasn't prepared for the kind of strategy Emily was about to employ. She wasn't looking for a direct confrontation. She was looking for a way to turn the flagship's strength against it. As Emily's starship hurtled toward the field of asteroids, she initiated a series of tight maneuvers that threw off the targeting systems of the flagship's weapons. The flagship's guns fired, but each shot missed, the massive beams of energy crashing harmlessly into rocks or space itself. It was too slow, too big, and it didn't understand the agility of its opponent. Varoth's gaze flicked between the screen and the technicians. There were no errors in the simulation, no flaws in the system. And yet, Emily was making this work. The flagship's massive form continued to chase her through the debris, its weapons useless against the onslaught of rock and space dust Emily had expertly woven around her. And then, in a move that left the entire council room silent, Emily dove into the core of the asteroid field, pulling her ship into a narrow gap between two massive chunks of rock. The flagship followed. It was a fatal mistake. As Emily's starship shot past the narrow gap, she triggered the final phase of her plan. The flagship's sensors couldn't react in time, its bulk far too cumbersome to avoid the trap. The flagship collided with the largest asteroid in the field, its massive hull cracking under the strain. A cascade of explosions erupted from the flagship's engine compartment, sending it spinning out of control. It was a slow, inevitable death, and Emily had orchestrated it with the grace of a maestro conducting a symphony. The alien fleet was finished. The flagship was destroyed. And as the last of the enemy ships fell apart in a cloud of debris, Emily's starship coasted to a stop in the quiet aftermath. The simulation had ended, and the room fell silent. Varroth blinked, unsure of what to say. What he had witnessed could not be explained by traditional means. It had not been a battle of strength, nor of technology. It had been a battle of sheer will, of creativity, of a human mind refusing to be beaten by any odds. He had watched as Emily not only survived but reshaped the entire course of the battle, using tactics no one had thought possible. The child had done what no one else, alien or human, could have imagined. And it left him with a single thought. Humans were far more dangerous than he had ever realized. The room was still, save for the soft hum of the equipment in the background. Emily sat in the pilot's chair, breathing heavily, her fingers still lightly gripping the controls. She wasn't sure what to feel in that moment. Exhaustion, relief, or perhaps even confusion. She had just fought a battle that seemed impossible, and she had won. But as the screen in front of her flashed the words "Simulation Complete" in bold letters, the weight of what she had just done began to settle in. Around her, the alien council watched in stunned silence. Varroth, still standing beside the observation panel, was motionless, his sharp gaze fixed on her through the glass. Emily could feel his eyes on her, but she didn't flinch. She had faced a fleet of warships. A single admiral wouldn't intimidate her. Not now. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Varroth spoke. His voice, when it came, was surprisingly measured, though it carried a hint of something deeper, something like respect, though it was hard to say for certain. "You have surpassed all expectations, human." His voice was calm but tinged with disbelief. "This simulation was designed to test not just your abilities as a pilot, but your capacity for tactical ingenuity. And yet, you have done something no one else has done before." Emily took a deep breath. "I just did what I thought was right," she said, her voice steady but with an underlying edge of exhaustion. "I didn't think about it. I just reacted, like anyone would, right?" Varroth tilted his head slightly, his alien eyes narrowing as he regarded her. "Perhaps. But no other species has demonstrated such adaptability, such willingness to break the rules of combat." He paused for a moment, his gaze shifting briefly to the display, which was now showing the wreckage of the alien fleet. "The destruction was almost total. In all my years, I have never seen a human child accomplish what you have just done." Emily blinked at the word child. She was just that, a child. After all, wasn't she? 12 years old. The thought felt strange now, given the gravity of the situation. But what she had done wasn't about age. It was about the quickness of the mind, the power of unpredictability, the understanding that sometimes the best way to win wasn't to play by the rules. It was to rewrite them entirely. "Don't take this the wrong way," Emily began slowly, trying to gather her thoughts. "But is that all you came here to do? Test me?" Varroth's brow furrowed. "Our purpose here was to observe, to understand the nature of your species, how you fight, how you think, your potential." She tilted her head. "My potential? So you don't care about how I feel when I'm in a battle, or what my thoughts are when I'm out there. It's just about the outcome." His gaze softened for just a fraction of a second. "It is about what you are capable of, what you can accomplish under extreme pressure." Emily's mind raced, but she didn't respond immediately. Was that all they saw her as? Some kind of test subject, a means to an end? She understood that the aliens were here for information. That much was clear, but what bothered her was the fact that none of them seemed to care about the humanity of it all. "Maybe I am capable of a lot of things," she said quietly, her voice laced with a quiet defiance. "But I'm more than just a test. You can see that now, can't you?" Varroth didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned toward the other members of the council. They exchanged looks among themselves, communicating in ways that Emily couldn't quite understand. When they turned back to her, the Admiral spoke once more. "You are more than we expected. And because of that, our mission here has changed. We came to study your species, but now we have a far more difficult question to answer. Emily's stomach tightened. What's that? Varroth's eyes locked with hers, a rare hint of something approaching respect flickering in his gaze. Now we must determine whether your species is a threat or an opportunity. The weight of Varroth's words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Emily's heart skipped a beat. A threat or an opportunity? What did that even mean? She had just spent the last few hours fighting against the alien fleet in a simulation. She had won, and now they were asking if humanity was a threat. She could feel her pulse quicken, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I don't understand," she said, her voice steady, though there was a hint of confusion in it. "What are you talking about? We're just people. We don't go around looking for trouble." Varroth tilted his head slightly, his alien features unreadable. "That is precisely the issue," he said. "Your kind does not seek war, but when faced with it, you do not yield. You do not back down. Your adaptability, your creativity in the face of overwhelming force, it is not the response of a species that seeks peace." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "It is the response of a species that will fight until the very end, no matter the cost." Emily felt a chill run through her. She didn't think of herself as a fighter. She wasn't some hardened warrior like the aliens in front of her. She was just a kid who loved space, who had dreamed of becoming an explorer. But what Varroth was saying, it felt different. It felt like they were seeing something in her that she didn't even fully understand herself. "We're not trying to be a threat," she replied, her voice firm. "But if we're pushed into a corner, we'll fight. We'll do whatever it takes to survive." She could feel her heart racing, but she refused to back down. "And if that means outsmarting you, then that's what we'll do. We don't give up, no matter how impossible things seem." Varroth studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. The rest of the council was quiet, watching the interaction unfold with rapt attention. Emily could feel their eyes on her, but she refused to look away. She had made it this far, hadn't she? She wasn't about to let them think she was just some insignificant child who couldn't stand up for herself or her people. "Your resilience is remarkable," Varroth finally said, his voice almost contemplative. "But it is also dangerous. We have encountered many species, and most of them bend to the pressure of a stronger force. Your kind does not. You challenge that force, adapt to it, and grow stronger." His gaze softened, just slightly, as if something new was stirring in his mind. "I have seen this before, in smaller ways, in different encounters with humans. But never like this. Never on this scale." Emily stood up from the pilot's seat, a sense of unease creeping over her. She wasn't sure where this conversation was going, but she didn't like the direction. "So, what are you saying? That because we won't give up, we're a danger to you?" Varroth's lips twitched, as though he were considering his words carefully. "It is not the will to fight that makes you dangerous. It is the will to survive. That is something the rest of the galaxy underestimates. That is something we did not anticipate. A species capable of surviving against overwhelming odds, always finding new ways to adapt, to innovate. That is what makes you unpredictable." The words stung, but Emily refused to show weakness. "We're not dangerous," she said, her voice unwavering. "We're just trying to live. We do what we have to do to protect ourselves and those we care about. I'm not asking for you to like us or to agree with us. But don't look at us like we're some kind of threat. We've never started a war. We just finished them." Varroth's expression softened for a fraction of a second, and Emily thought, just for a moment, she saw something like understanding in his eyes. But it was gone before she could be sure. He turned to the other members of the council, speaking in their native tongue, a series of sharp clicks and hums that Emily couldn't follow. There was a tense silence as they deliberated. The seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. Emily's mind raced. She had just taken down an entire fleet in a simulator, and yet The thing that frightened her the most was the quiet uncertainty hanging in the air. They were deciding her future, deciding humanity's future. Finally, Varoth turned back to her, his posture more relaxed, but his eyes still heavy with the weight of the decision ahead. "We will need more time to consider your species' place in the galaxy," he said slowly. "But know this, human. You have proven that your kind is not to be underestimated." The silence in the room deepened after Varoth's words. Emily stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind still reeling from the conversation. She had just done something no one else had ever done. Defeated an entire alien fleet, rewritten the rules of a simulation, and shown them that humanity wasn't a species to be underestimated. But now, the fate of her species was still hanging in the balance. She wasn't sure whether to be proud of what she'd done or terrified of what was coming next. Varoth and the Council exchanged looks once more. The weight of their deliberations was palpable, and Emily could feel the pressure building, like the calm before a storm. Her mind raced, thinking of the things she wanted to say, the questions she wanted to ask. But in that moment, the only thing she could do was wait. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Varoth spoke again, his voice calm but with a new undertone, a hint of something she hadn't detected before. "We have made our decision," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "Your species has shown something rare, something that we did not expect. It is clear that your adaptability, your resilience, cannot be easily dismissed, but there is one question that remains unanswered." Emily's stomach tightened. What question? Whether or not you can be trusted. Varoth's gaze didn't waver. The very qualities that make you formidable, the adaptability, the unpredictability, also make you potentially dangerous. You have proven that you will fight for survival, no matter the odds. But will you fight for the right reasons, for the greater good? Emily felt a knot form in her throat. She had never considered it like that before. To her, it had always been simple: survival, family, friends, and peace. But to these aliens, it was something much larger, something global. A question of morality. A question of who could be trusted with power, who could be trusted with a future that involved them all. "I can't speak for everyone on Earth," she said slowly, carefully choosing her words. "But I know this. We fight to protect those we love. We fight to survive, yes. But we fight for the right reasons. We don't go looking for wars. But if we're forced into one, we fight with everything we have. Because that's who we are." Varoth's eyes narrowed slightly, as though considering her words. The council remained silent, their expressions unreadable. The tension in the room felt unbearable. "And what of the future?" Varoth asked. "What if your kind is faced with a threat you cannot defeat? What if your survival means the destruction of others?" Emily's chest tightened. She had never thought about it like that. The idea that her people could destroy others in the name of survival was a terrifying thought, but she didn't back down. She couldn't. "We don't want to destroy anyone. But we will defend ourselves, and we will find a way to make peace, if possible. That's the way of humanity. Never give up on peace. Never give up on finding common ground." For a long moment, there was silence. The council exchanged another round of looks, this time less guarded, more thoughtful. Varoth stepped forward, his face impassive but no longer distant. His words were measured, almost reverent. "We will consider your answer, human. The decision has not been made lightly. Your species will not be judged based solely on one child's actions in a simulation, but what you have demonstrated here today is enough to earn us a second look." Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She wasn't sure what was coming next, but she could tell they hadn't dismissed humanity completely. They hadn't labeled them as a threat, and that, in itself, was a victory. "We will return," Varoth said, turning toward the council. "And when we do, it will be with an answer. An answer that will determine the future of humanity in this galaxy." As he spoke, the lights in the room began to flicker, and the display panel started to power down, signaling the end of the simulation. Emily looked around, her mind still spinning, but she was filled with a sense of quiet determination. She had done it. She had shown them humanity's strength, and now she just had to hope that what they saw in her was enough. With a final glance at Varoth, Emily turned and left the chamber, knowing that the future of her people had just been changed forever.